Good afternoon, Patriots. This is the American Vision, broadcast on the TLBTV network and brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Project. I'm your host, Bill Muckler, and I'm coming to you from my home studio in Cocoa, Florida, on America's beautiful Space Coast. And today, I'm really excited. I'm having a guest that's one of my newsletter subscribers, and we've been Facebook friends and everything. And now we're getting an opportunity to talk to each other. And that's David Hooper. And David is an entrepreneur. He's been involved in the business world, knows how things work. And also, I think you're coming to us from, are you in Dearborn or Detroit? Or
I'm in a suburb of Detroit. No one's really from Detroit, but
from Detroit, right?
but we just moved back to the Detroit area from Chicago a few years back. So.
Okay. So, David, I'm introducing David to the show, and what we're going to do today is we're going to be truth seekers, seeking the truth. And David, you have a project coming up. It's called well, I'm going to let you tell us what it's all about, and give us the title of it, and then maybe tell us a little bit about yourself also.
All right, I'll do my best. We do have a project coming up. It is the second installment of a trilogy. The film that is coming up is called The Anatomy of a Great Deception Part 2. Now, when I first got into this, I was making fun of my quote-unquote filmmaker status, which, like I said, I don't want to insult real filmmakers. But this is a follow-up to really a personal story that began with The Anatomy of a Great Deception 1, which is not the best titled movie of all time. I wish I'd come up with something shorter. So we've adopted, if you hear me refer to AGD1, that would be Anatomy of a Great Deception 1, and
AGD 2.
You got it. So if we can get past that, I think we'll save a bunch of syllables while I talk.
Okay. So
the film is a follow-up to a movie we released in 2014, which for me still sounds surreal to say it, because my life has really been in entrepreneurship and business. I've had several of them, ranging from, as small as 10 employees to as large as a few hundred spread out across the U.S. One of those companies is still going, which provides the passive income I need to be able to research and do these things full time. But in a lot of ways, I've really exited that entrepreneurial world, although many of those experiences definitely come into play when you're launching a movie. And it didn't even start off as a movie. I think my story is probably not that dissimilar from a lot of your readers and listeners. In my personal situation, this was about 10 years after 9/11 had occurred. And this was in February of 2011. And I just happened to catch a clip on CNN or one of the big mainstream news stations in preparation for the upcoming 10-year anniversary of 9/11, which was going to be in another 6 months or so. And it was just a picture of George Bush sitting in that Sarasota classroom, and just this question occurred to me. I wasn't a conspiracy theorist. I wasn't looking to, answer some unsolved mystery. I've just always been curious, and I was raised by a father who was a World War II era man, who I do believe, that's your generation, which I do believe was the greatest generation. And I think we're in one hell of a lot of trouble, because the same level of honor and integrity and character that built this country seems to be evaporating. And, I'm not going to blame baby boomers on it, but it's the baby boomers and their children have seem to have and I'm part of those generations, so I understand. There's more of a sense of entitlement, and we take our freedom for granted without realizing really what it costs to be free. Even to be able to have this conversation over the internet is a privilege that not all countries offer. And even in this nation, which was known for the First Amendment for a freedom to speak, recently just saw one of the biggest alternative news media networks in the world shut down uniformly and in a coordinated fashion. These weren't 25 individual decisions by CNN and Twitter and Facebook to shut InfoWars down. This was in my opinion, this was coordinated. It was coordinated by people that I think have power that is far beyond that of a president. And it's scary times when, like we were just talking off air, it's a virtual burning of the books that, we look back in history on, and we are aghast that the German people could have allowed such a thing to happen. Yet it's slowly, maybe not even so slowly, happening here, and we don't see ourselves in this parallel because we seem to be following the natural progression of a nation. It starts off in chains, and then we fight for our freedom. Then there comes the moral and the ethical convictions, and then there comes the prosperity, defending our freedom. That was your generation, and then becomes the generations that start to lean towards more of the spectrum on the side of apathy and entitlement. And we're now at the point where our Constitution is being wiped out. As our forefathers predicted, there would be pressure to, in fact, remove it from the same evil organization that's in existence today that was in existence a few hundred years ago, and it's quite easy to track. And so, this country needs, and it has, but it needs thousands, if not millions of people doing what we're doing. Because cumulatively, this, let's call ourselves members of an alternative media institution. It is that, and the fact that we are still an armed populace is, in my opinion, what is keeping us out of literally slavery, bondage, which is funny because that is the last stage of a nation's development. It ends up where it begins, in the very bondage that it first broke free of, which we began working on 250 years ago.
Yes, and I wrote about that in my book. In fact, I devoted a section of a chapter explaining how we've gone through all those stages, and now we're in the stage of dependency right now, morphing into or evolving into the bondage, back to bondage.
You maybe can edify me a little bit. Is that the last stage before before we're right back to tyranny?
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, so the urgency is there. I've got a lot of friends that are still in the quote unquote regular world, and their coping mechanism has been to just turn away and just go about their personal business. To on a micro level, that might be fine, but if too many people on a macro or national level do that, no one is going to have a regular day-to-day life there's a lot of trouble headed our way if we don't get our collective asses out of the ground, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. Diplomatic way, I guess.
That sounds like a very good way to put it. I agree.
I mean, how do people respond to you when you broach these subjects? I mean, what are some of the experiences you've had?
Well, when I wrote the book 2020, and I have 20 issues, 20 chapters, and I talk about them, people say, "Oh, is it a real?" First thing they do is it a real book? And I say, well, yeah, it's a real book. It's got a cover and a dust cover and all that stuff. Because they think, oh, you just photocopied a few sheets and stapled them together, And then I'll say, well, I researched this. Well, what do you mean you research? We research everything. I said, I've spent, thousands of hours, going on all these sites, and I didn't go on, just the New York Times or whatever. I went to all the .gov sites, and what I did is I proved my case, using the government's own information. And so I came up with solutions. I said, well, that'll never work. And I said, well, let's go through the entire chapter, read the entire chapter on, say, why education is in the condition it's in, or why immigration is in the condition it's in. And then when they read it, they say, oh, and now I understand what you're talking about. Yeah, okay, you're right. So people are just generally skeptical unless they see it in glitz on Hannity or on CNN or on MSNBC, depending on what their ideology is. And what I try to explain to people is your idiotic ideology is driving you to insanity. Stop the ideology and start thinking about we the people, and thinking about, what kind of country we really need, which is a country that's, based on a small, limited government that's close to home.
Well, it's funny, but that's how the first movie began to take life. So I stumbled onto this question about George Bush in the classroom in 2011. And I never really got a satisfactory answer. The official White House answer, I believe, was they didn't want to scare the children in the school, which I comment on this on the first film, which I'm looking at this as an average citizen with my average person's commentary, which seemed to strike a chord with a lot of people, because I really shared the victories and the defeats and the ups and downs, and how it affected my family, and the rejection I got at first and overcoming it. And I'm sure anyone listening has experienced that on some level. And this little film started off as, because there's no word, you can't go up to a group of people and there's nothing you can say in a minute or two, nor is there a technical report you can point to and have them look it over and have this light bulb go off. Everything is still going to fall in, some aberrations are always expected. And I was trying to convey what it was, the cumulative information screaming a very different story that just a few personalities on television were pounding into the American psyche, which we're going to show this in the second film, they themselves without knowledge of what happened on 9/11. And that's where Tucker Carlson comes in, and I'll come back to him in a minute. So I didn't know anything about filmmaking or anything. I'm just like, I need to show these people what it is I'm looking at, because I can't get that light bulb to go off. And I had the people close to me in my family. Typically, I've been a relatively respected guy, viewed as successful. If you were reading about me in the newspaper, it was because of a business success of some sort. Not famous or anything like that, but everything was nice and comfortable. And I thought I would just start saying, hey, 9/11 looks like it wasn't really done by some guys from the Middle East. It might have been closer to home. I thought they would just go, wow, what do I look into to find out more about that? But the resistance I got was, it was palpable, which, I think we can just label, for now, just call it cognitive dissonance, which is just a human defense mechanism to just repel ideas that essentially would force us to break down our beliefs in order to incorporate them.
David, in my book, I start off the book talking about paradigms, that the reason people can't accept different ideas is because they have paradigm paralysis. And so they just can't think out of the box, and they can't think that there might be something different than what they believed all their life. And to get people to believe something different that goes against what they've always thought is really difficult. And there's very few people can kind of go through life without suffering from paradigm paralysis.
There's a quote in a book I wrote. It hasn't been released yet, but I went through history. We found we'll end up with about 2,000 quotes in it. That it's basically it's a guidebook to show you. I think the slogan of the book as we have it now is "The devil's in the details." Because that is where, that's how a lot of evil is conducted in this world. And there's a quote, and I want to say it was Albert Einstein, but it was along the lines of, your worldview by the time you reach young adulthood is nothing more than a series of prejudices that you built up, through your teenage years. Meaning it's really, it's no more relevant than, typically if you grow up in a Republican house, you're probably going to be a Republican. If you grow up in a Catholic home, you're probably going to be a Catholic. The correlation of that is incredibly high. And if you grow up like I did with my father, he was, like I said, a Navy man. He was an entrepreneur also, but he respected authority. And it's a very hard thing. It was very hard for me personally to really, when you get that first look behind the curtain, and you see what is really going on behind the scenes to put on the menagerie that is put on for the people, it was scary. I mean, I was late at night, my jaw on the ground, my heart racing, and I'm reading article after article after article that cumulatively started telling a very different story. Not the story you get in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the mainstream media, which made it so hard to, well, how could it be that all the media is not covering this? Okay, maybe a few aren't, but what I found alone is newsworthy. Why isn't someone at least covering this? And then you start to do a little digging and you realize there's actually pressure to not cover this. And when we were younger, there was the FCC used to have a rule that you couldn't own more than 25 media outlets anywhere in the nation. And, those days, that's been now long gone for a while. And
there's 6 or 7 that own everything, I believe.
We're down to 5.
5.
5 individual males. They happen to all be men at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the heads of, the ABC, Disney, the Fox. These are the Viacom. These are the biggest media companies that control everything. The books that get published, the newspapers, the Scientific Americans, the National Geographics, and they are very coordinated in what they allow the public to see and not see. So if you think you are getting a wide array of, you can trust your information as you're getting it from this wide array, from Popular Mechanics to Smithsonian Magazine to the New York Times. I've come to find out that, I don't want to get melodramatic, but let's just call him our enemy. The enemy a long, long time ago took control of our country's media system. I mean, before you were born, before I was born. And so we were born into a rigged game, in a sense. And it takes a little perseverance, a little curiosity, and maybe a little courage to go digging underneath those covers. But like we said, right now, the internet gives us access to everything. Anything that is recorded anywhere, any piece of information that has ever existed in human history is at our fingertips. And don't get me wrong, I still use the internet for other things other than research, but humanity has not had this sort of a window open in its history as far as I can tell. I mean, we have to maybe go back to the library in Alexandria, Egypt, which housed all of the world's information until it was burned. I don't think the information was burned. I think that was maybe carted away, and then we enter the Dark Ages, while the same evil forces at work today, that they were around back then. In fact, even, I think I saw a cross on your chain there. But from my personal perspective, I've linked this group back. Some people call them the Illuminati or the 1% or the New World Order or the establishment. That was in the 1960s. You can keep going further back. And you can follow them to the days of Jesus Christ, when he called this very group of people the synagogue of Satan. These people would pretend to be Jews, but they would actually be worshipers of the fallen angel. So I was not there after the first movie, nor do I really get there in the second movie, which are chronological tales of how my eyes began to open and how it affected me and how it affected my family. But by the third film, at least for me, which is due out in 2020, I think 2020, for me, it led to this revelation that, wow, at least it seemed that one of the characters in the Bible was true, that this Satan character. And it got me, you know, I'd just been pushing it off because, like we talked about, one of the prejudices that I grew up with was that this is a book of myths. It's a book of nonsense. But when I actually started to read it for myself, and how ironic, because I don't think I've ever been somewhere where that book is not more than 50 feet away. It doesn't matter if I'm traveling at a hotel or it's under all of our noses. And it's only when you look at it with your own eyes, like you said, and you actually see that the future was predicted without error, seemingly. At least I haven't been able to find one yet. And believe me, I've tried, because the implications of that book is true changes just about everything you view about living life. So I had an interest in trying to punch a hole in this. And I've had a very hard time doing it. So in a lot of senses, you know, for me, that what I call the last layer of the onion, which it's very dark until that very last layer. And then suddenly you see where there is hope. You start to understand what are the greater forces at work that end up manifesting themselves into something like 9/11, which seemingly has no link to anything biblical. But at the end of the day, that is where I ended up. Although in the movie that's coming out next September, AGD 2, that really is not part of because I just wasn't there yet. This is following my chronological, awakening, if you will.
And enlightenment.
Yes, which I think is a process that never ends. It's not like a point that you reach and you've arrived. It is like a graph. It's like a continuum. And, at the very bottom, starting point of the graph, at least for me, was questions about 9/11, something is wrong. And I kept looking, and this led to things about our Central Intelligence Agency and how the Federal Reserve operates, which, as a business person, I was blown away that I could have gone my whole life with not understanding how the Federal Reserve, which isn't federal at all, it's owned by some private families that are mostly European.
The bankers own it, and that's was fun. The way I learned about it was studying it, and then I discovered The Creature of Jekyll Island.
Jekyll Island, yeah.
And,
book. Excellent. Highly recommend that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so everybody in my family, that became required reading about 20 years ago when Griffin published it. And
so you were way ahead of the curve.
What's
so
that?
You were reading that book 20 years ago? Because that book was introduced to me like 7 years ago.
Yeah, it came out in the 90s, and I thought, wow, here's a book that's telling me everything that I thought, put it all together into one place. But here again, if I talk to someone about the Federal Reserve, they think, oh no, it's a government agency, that they're sacred. I said, no, they're not. They're the big bankers, and they're the ones who manipulate our currency, and our Congress gave that right away from us to them.
In 1913.
Yeah.
If I were writing a history book, we lost the Revolutionary War in 1913. Or let's just say it was a very decisive battle.
Mm-hmm.
And because we don't control the media and history's written by winners, it's very hard to identify that.
Yeah, in fact, I had a speaking engagement today, and I told the people about 1913. Actually, 3 things happened that year. Also, the 16th and 17th Amendment. 16th Amendment was ratified, and some people don't think it was ratified. That created the income tax and the Internal Revenue Service, which really screwed all of us. And then the 17th Amendment took the power away from the states to select their senators to be representatives to the Congress, and put it into a popular vote, which means now that the states have no representation in Washington, D.C. So that turned the whole thing upside down to where the federal government, the central federal government, is above all of us, and they treat the states like regional departments of the federal government. And then here's we, the people down here, getting ready for, and they don't know it, but getting ready for cultural Marxism and the New World Order to take over.
Yeah, even with me, and my friends are PhDs in economics, and judges and scientists, lawyers and businessmen, investment bankers. You get the picture. And I had to put myself in their shoes, because I've had many people talk to me like you just talked to me, and you're throwing out amendments in Congress and ratifying it. And as much as I thought I was well-read, and I would just kind of tune out. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, oh, so this is a much bigger problem than I could ever deal, blah, blah, blah. But, and I've actually found a way to talk about the Federal Reserve in a very simplified example that when I talk about it, it hits home. And I had one particular friend who just been fighting me on this, and I went through, in fact, I'll go through it with you right now if you wish, but
Please, because I'm finishing writing my second book, 2020, A Clear Vision for Our Future, and I may want to put that in there.
So it goes like this. And we've done a number of podcasts, and we have a radio show that's on hold right now until this film is finished with production. But we actually did an entire show on this where we broke it down step by step, just in very simple terms. So, and I'm about to right now give you the even simpler 5-minute verbal version. But the challenge begins with, we're going to form a new society. Now, I happen to live on a little island that has about 10,000 people, and I always use my hometown as the example. But let's say we were going to start a nation with 1,000 people in it, and we were going to be on this little island. And the challenge I put out is that I will be in control of this nation without anyone knowing it in a matter of a couple of decades. And everyone's like, impossible. I'm like, well, all right, let's go through it. So it's a hypothetical, and you gotta imagine a little bit here. But let's just say we've got 1,000 people, and countries don't form this way, although one has formed by a vote. But we get 1,000 people together. We're going to form our own nation, and we're going to need everything. We're going to need farmers and doctors and business people and restaurateurs and government work. You get the picture. All right. We need full workforce. And I've got a little business experience, so I say to everyone, hey, why don't I just handle the banking? And everyone's fine. That's good. Everyone's going to follow their own passions and dreams. So our very first day in business, there's no currency yet. We need the liquid, the currency to be able to trade things. Bartering's not really going to work. We're not going to use wampum. We've come up with this idea to use fiat paper money, and I'll be the banker. And I'll even say, hey, we'll have great, easy loan terms, and we'll get cash circulating through the community, and we'll be on our way. In that first day, pretty much all 1,000 citizens are waiting in line to get a loan. The doctor needs a loan for x-ray equipment. The nurse needs a loan to go to college. The farmer needs a loan to buy a combine. You get the picture?
Got it.
So this is great, because now we're injecting money into the currency system. And these loans were even really low interest, because I'm a nice guy. Typically we're supposed to charge 5%, but I'll tell you what, we'll just charge 2% to get us started. And at the end of the first day, we've gotten all the loans have been issued. Everyone is now beginning to do their thing in this world. They're following their passions. And they probably think everything's great. But what they don't realize is by the end of the first day, I've already become their king, but they don't know it. And this is where I get a lot of people, what do you mean? How have you become the king? I don't understand. Well, I said, think about it. How much money's in circulation after that first day? I mean, everyone pulls out their calculator. Well, 1,000 people times, we loaned out $50,000 on average per person. We do the math. There's $50 million in circulation. And I said, that is correct. And I said, so that is not going to change for 1 year when the first interest payments due. And how much is interest? The average is going to be 2%, let's say. And on $50 million, we're looking at about $1 million in interest. And I said, do you realize that already right now, you're in a situation of owing me money that you will never, ever be able to fully repay me? Because even if you were to pull out all the $50,000 that, or the $50 million that I put into the economy, $50,000 at a time through these loans, that plus the interest that's owed on the loan, if we collected everything in circulation, great, we get the 50 million back. But how are you going to pay the 1 million in interest? And this one's not like such a hard hitting, it's not like such a big deal. I show them then, when you extrapolate that over time, at some point, everything we pay is going towards interest. But for me, the one that makes my friends' jaws drop is I said, look at it this way. Right now, there's 1,000 people in this nation that are $50,000 plus interest in debt to me personally, not to the government of our little utopia land, but to me, the banker, the private personal banker. And so my net worth is now $50 million and growing. The people's net worth is negative $50 million and growing. And it will never get closer than it was that first day. It will just keep separating. And now I may be a really nice guy and I might want to stay hidden behind the scenes. So I'm putting money into the politicians that I want elected in my hometown. No one even needs to know my name, but I can write the $1 million checks. And if I don't like your message, guess what? I'll fund another guy's campaign. Or I'll maybe suggest that the media in our little utopia world maybe run some stories that are against a candidate I don't want. And now why would they do that? Well, guess who funded the loans that allow them to operate? I did. And if you don't go with my game, guess what? I'll either pull your funding, make you pay the loan, or I'll finance 20 guys to pop up around you to drown you out so you're never heard from again. If I want to have the people invest their money into a military budget, I might even stage an attack from a made-up enemy to get the people scared, to get us to build armaments that I'm ultimately going to use to control my people once I announce myself as king. And this is where my well-educated / indoctrinated, because I got a pretty good education too, but I would now chalk that up to, it was just a deeper indoctrination. And you get this false sense of security because you can have an MBA or a PhD or a doctor in front of your name, but it is just that. It is just a false sense of security, and be careful not to be signing your own BS.
Yeah. And one thing you've kept from the other 999 on your island nation is you created that money, fiat money, out of thin air.
Well, that's right? So I had a friend who went to Dartmouth and he followed up. He's like, well, where did you get the money for the fiat? And I was like, well, that's the whole trick.
Exactly.
I didn't do it. I just ran a printing press.
Exactly. And that's what
Go ahead.
Isn't that exactly what the Federal Reserve is doing now? Except I don't even know if they're printing money anymore. I think they just do it, on the keyboard. They just put in a 1 and a whole bunch of zeros and send it to the Bank of America or SunTrust or whoever in the heck it might be, and then they can loan out that money plus 90% more. So if a bank says I need $1 billion, they actually can lend out $1.9 billion, and it's all printed out of thin air.
Well, this is where the fractional reserve portion of the system is so dangerous. So the Federal Reserve has two types of customers: governments and other banks. They never really lend money to consumers like you or I.
Right.
So they'll loan the money to like a Bank of America. And then that Bank of America reloans money to other banks, and they reloan it and reloan it. And because we have, I think you're referring to a law that says a bank must keep 10% of its total deposits on hand. So that's the fractional reserve that has to be kept, which means 90% is sent to another bank, and they only have to keep 10% of that. And the remaining now 81% is sent to another bank. And you actually, for every dollar of debt injected into our financial system, you're actually creating closer to $10 of debt in real life. And that's how we are getting these hyperbolic debt curves, where just in the last few years, our national debt has gone from 10 million to 15 million. I think it's now over 20 million. And we're now at
that's more than $20 trillion right now.
Trillion, I said, yeah. And think about that. That's $60,000 per living American. It doesn't matter if you're 1 month old or 100. If everyone somehow could go without food and any other expense for about 2 years just to pay down that, which is impossible, we die out as a species, that's what it would take in order to pay down this debt. By design, the debt, this is a house of cards that is designed to collapse. And this is where I didn't start to put this together, but I started getting into the book of Revelation. And it's very interesting that the book of Revelation talks about how the Antichrist is going to come from a financial background. And when you really understand the financial situation we're in, all these people have to do is just pull out the one card supporting the entire menagerie, and it all crumbles down. And then what happens is you've got suddenly the price of currency, you get what you had in Germany, where you're waiting in line for bread, and by the time you get to the front of the line, it's so much inflation's happened, you can't even afford a loaf of bread anymore. Mm-hmm. Then there'll probably be a period where we're maybe trading some precious metals. Those are just temporary. At the end of the day, fiat currency, you can't eat it. You can't, it's not a Band-Aid. It won't make you healthy. At the end of the day, what's currency going to be? It's going to be food and oil and medical supplies. And there are plenty of people that have seen the plans of this evil cabal, that their intentions are to do just that, allow the system to collapse. And I think what we have then is a scenario right out of the book of Revelation, just as Jesus Christ predicted in 90 AD, where suddenly the synagogue of Satan, the rulers of the world, and think about this. Financial system collapses. You and I both can guess what's going to happen in the United States. You're going to have people killing each other over food, anarchy. Some of the preppers and the people living off the land may survive. But this is going to be a terrible time, worst time than ever in human history. And it's headed our way if we don't. And think about the sweet music it will be to anyone's ears, that is someone that's not well-read or informed, when these very same people that allowed and actually engineered this collapse come back with a wonderful, seemingly wonderful solution along the lines of, look, enough of this living in the dark ages. We've got someone that is going to lead us out of this. He's a financial genius, and here's what we're going to do. It's very simple. It's enough of the wars. We need to come together as a planet. And in order to join our system, it's very simple, show your allegiance by, I don't know if it's a tattoo or an injection or a microchip or whatever. I mean, we now have the technology to do this. And they're going to offer people this stark choice, which I believe will be just like the Bible predicted. You can either take the mark or choose to be beheaded, as gruesome as that sounds.
The mark of the beast.
And now it's going to seem like a no-brainer because, wait a minute, so I can either get my head chopped off or I can just have this little thing put here, and now I don't need to carry credit cards or money around, and you're going to just put $20,000 into my account to get me started? Yeah, where do I sign up? And these people don't realize they're doing the very last thing they could ever do to save their soul. I mean, they're losing their soul in the process if God's promise is true. Now, I wasn't yet on this biblical level or having tied these things together, but I'd certainly, by the time AGD2, as where it falls chronologically in my personal eye-opening, is all I knew at this time was, wow, our Federal Reserve is not federal. It is owned by about 300 people who seem to all be related to each other. Most of them are of European descent. You can link them, you can track them through history, and you track them back to just working from the Roman times. Rome was never conquered. It just kind of morphed into the Vatican. It didn't even bother changing cities. It just stayed in Rome. And then the Vatican popes fueled the European, what is the European community today, and the dukes and duchesses and kings and queens and their offspring. A lot of them became our U.S. presidents. It's not an accident that many of them are only a couple of degrees of separation away, and that maybe a lot of these elections are a lot more rigged than we believe. And it would seem these people are preparing for a Holocaust that makes what Hitler did look like nothing more than a practice run. And it's again, I go back to these ancient books that have this story laid out completely in detail, and I see it unfolding, and they say even that it will begin after this incredible event, the regathering of a nation of Israel. It'll begin then. And you can actually mathematically figure out that the actual day, May 14th, 1948, is the exact day God predicted that nation would be reborn. Too many things that are not accidents anymore, and there's a lot I don't understand. But maybe this is where a little bit of my faith comes in. I now believe the words in that book, even the words that just I don't understand yet. I just have faith that they're going to come to pass, like all of history has come to pass, as that book has stated it would. So I'm not a Bible thumper, and that's just words like ministry and Christian have a negative connotation to me. They're like shutdown words. But at the end of the day, that is just where I ended up personally. And it absolutely changed my life. And this second film is a progression of the story of how I ended up getting there. Because getting there was all based in science and research and fact. There was never this leap of faith or some mechanism where I was trying to fill some hole in my heart and I needed there to be a God. It was not like that at all. I was not looking for this, but this is where the truth led, and this is what I believe to be the unvarnished truth, whether it is exciting or whether it is what you were raised to believe. That's up to the individual viewer to work that out. But ultimately, I think that's going to be the main theme that closes out the trilogy. But we're not there yet, like I said. This movie, we're going to start to look at the Federal Reserve, and we're going to relook at history through a different lens. In fact, I'll ask you something that I've had a little fun with.
Okay.
In the modern era, Bill, what would you say are the 3 biggest one-day media events? And let's begin in 1960. So from 1960 to today, in your mind, what are the 3 biggest one-day media events that come to mind? What are the top three off your head?
Oh, if I just go back to 1960, I guess November 22nd of 63, when Kennedy was assassinated, and Kennedy was somebody who was really against the Federal Reserve, and that raises a lot of questions in my mind. And
Yep.
then just trying to think.
Would you put 9/11?
Yeah,
in the top
9/11, I guess would be more towards that would be one of the three, and of course I'm very skeptical of how all that happened. So yeah, that's one of them, and I'm just trying to think of, when you say three, I guess I'm thinking about all kinds of things that might be, here or there or whatever. You can go back to like the stock market. Black Friday, going back, when was that, in
87, I think.
87? Yeah, that happened. That was really a big thing, and I don't know. Help me out here.
Well, all right, so just about everyone I asked that question to has the identical answer for the first two: 9/11 and John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
And then for the third, I get a smattering of answers along everything from Robert F. Kennedy, MLK, Oklahoma City, Waco, the Challenger disaster. But there's a third event that wasn't successful, but had it been successful, I think it would easily have made the top three. Anything come to mind?
Reagan's shooting.
Yes. The assassination of Reagan.
And that was 1981, and yeah, when he was shot. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
So do I, but I'd come across something very interesting because when you get interested in 9/11, you're gonna, the research will naturally take you back into the 1960s, and it actually will take you back to 1913 and even earlier, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And you are right, Kennedy. It's very interesting that Kennedy certainly spoke out about the very same power source that I now see as being the biggest danger to our freedom, and it is this nebulous yet highly organized network that occupy positions of power in many, if not most, of our national institutions, even from presidents to heads of CIA to head of FDA, things like that. And I certainly understand as a CEO that I really could control the daily lives of my employees without them even knowing. I would just say one thing to my operations manager, and then they would make it happen, and I could see my employees mimicking what it is I wanted them to do. So I understand about having power at the top and how most Americans are taught to trust their authority, please your boss. And I was going somewhere with that, but institutions, blah, blah, blah. Forgive me, it'll come back to me in a minute.
You mentioned, these three great events.
Oh, thank you. So something, there's some very interesting parallels. For instance, on all three of those events, it just so happened that the Secret Service broke protocol on those days, all of them. Secret Service agents were waved off of Kennedy's limo. Secret Service agents did not move the president when over a dozen planes were thought to be hijacked. And how simple it would have been for a hijacker just to reroute a plane to a school. You're not even having to weave through buildings. And he just sat there. And there's a scene in the first movie it's a play on an old Sherlock Holmes story where Holmes ended up finding the culprit because the dog didn't bark during the crime, meaning the dog knew the person that committed the crime, implying that someone, whether it was, I don't think our President George Bush masterminded anything. If anything, I think he may have found out about 9/11 when it started happening. But someone at the Secret Service obviously told him, this is not a big deal. Don't worry about it. And at the exact same time, while he is just sitting, taking photographs with people in a school, you've got the Secret Service running over to Building 7 to evacuate it when there is absolutely no reason that building anyone should have had a fear of it collapsing. Yet while the building is still standing, we've got Secret Service agents on camera saying this building is going to collapse, which is an impossible thing to predict. Certainly in light of the fact that no steel frame building has ever collapsed in history because of fire, yet suddenly a building that was not on fire, not hit by any airplanes, they're certain that it's going to collapse, and taking the mayor of New York out of his emergency management bunker, and they're getting people out of this building. And they didn't do the same thing in all of the other Trade Center buildings. Again, odd. What was special about that building 7, which, as we all know, the news came out and announced its collapse as early as 2 hours before it happened, and the BBC made it famous for announcing it 20 minutes before it happened. But you can't, it proves that was a pre-planned event. And certainly if you understand anything about demolitions, which I educated myself on, a building cannot collapse in on itself as fast as a bowling ball unless you are knocking out the massive solid support beams that hold this thing up. And anyone that's played with Legos should get that. So,
that's what really got me started on being skeptical, because I kept asking myself, if these planes hit the Twin Towers at somewhere around 9 in the morning, how at 5 o'clock in the afternoon a building completely implodes upon himself? The only time that does that is when you have set demolitions to demolish a building so it implodes and falls in on itself. And how did that happen? And why did that building have all those records in it?
Yeah, how ironic that thousands of SEC cases were destroyed. WorldCom, Enron, the entire some banking litigation. Just these investigations were they disappeared. Very much the same way Donald Rumsfeld's $2.3 trillion, which on September 10th he comes out and says, we have a $2.3 trillion black hole, but we've got our best accountants working on it, who all were working on it at the Pentagon in the very area that was destroyed the very next morning. And somehow, even though we're already in the age of backup computers and redundancy in our information systems, he makes it seem like all the paper ledger sheets burned up and there's no way to ever put together where this $2.3 trillion went, which I think Congressman Steve Sims had it right in 1976 when he said that the American people have no idea to what extent their tax dollars are being used for their own enslavement. And some other congressmen that had similar things to say found themselves not living soon after, which I don't think it can all be attributed to just accidents. But now we start to get into
look
conjecture.
At somebody like Ron Paul. He's discredited as being a crackpot.
Yeah, and he's not. Even you've got Alex Jones, who seemingly is discredited as a crackpot, yet his viewership was larger than CNN's up until a few months ago. Think about that. And this is where I think, someone like Alex Jones and alternative media in general is such a threat to the existing power base in this country that, you're entering into dangerous waters. But this is what I think an American patriot looks like in the 21st century. It's not necessarily fighting redcoats invading our shores, and it might not be liberating Europe on Gold or Sword or Utah Beach. It is putting the truth out so the American people can see what is really happening. It is dumping our ignorance, which is not stupidity. It is simply we're ignoring something that is right under our nose. And it's people like you that bang pots and pans to get other people to finally look at it. And it's one of our last lines of defense. And I don't want to see my son grow up in a dystopian country. That is not what you, my father, and millions of other men and women have fought for and are still dying for today, frankly.
And when you say dystopian, I hope our readers understand if they read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World or 1984 or any books like that. That's pretty much what we're heading towards.
You know, books like that, at first I thought those were just really wild guesses, and guys like Aldous Huxley or H.G. Wells just kind of guessed close to the, they got close. But just with the Huxleys, when you go back in history, I find it also interesting that wherever there's a biblical theme, you find the Huxley family name. They're just always there. You go far back enough to T.H. Huxley. Now, he was known as Darwin's bulldog. And very much in the exact same way that the story of 9/11 was instantaneously and in a coordinated fashion put out to the world to shape the story from the beginning and never let the truth of the story ever go out. It was interesting that that's exactly how, and believe me, I believed in evolution my entire life, but T.J. Huxley, without any proof or evidence, there were a number of highly regarded scientists and philosophers and thinkers of the day, and in a coordinated fashion, out of the blue, they endorsed Darwin as the genius. He has solved our, the debate of origin, when in fact, it has never been duplicated in any scientific experiment, ever. It remains to this day a theory. So it was just interesting to see the great uncle, I believe it was, of Aldous Huxley, helping shape one of the most important cornerstones in the world's psyche today, which is we evolved from some simple cell. Yet modern day science has now shown us, well, that cell wasn't simple. It had DNA in it. And now we know what that did. In fact, modern day computers, it took us 15 years just to map it to find out that essentially this is information, a highly complex code that is telling other cells where to go, and it builds this system that is our body. And so evolution starts to just fall apart a little bit, and you're left with, okay, either God created us or aliens did. And either way, you still have the same problem. If aliens did, well, who created the aliens? It just comes right back to, you eliminate all the possibilities, and there's only one possibility left, and that is there must be a God, an intelligent designer, whatever term you want to put on it. But the Huxley name, it's what I found fascinating is, if you read books from this, I'll just call them the nebulous cabal, to which I referred to earlier. It seems to go along family lines. It really seems to follow bloodlines. They seem to always be predicting the future before it happens. And we've got a segment in this upcoming film where when you see it together, the amount of times that 9/11 was predicted in the media, it's astounding. And you can even, I don't think Aldous Huxley was making a wild guess. I think he was in his own creative way sharing some plans that he was privy to. You can even go further back in time. I mean, tell me if this story sounds familiar to you. In 1896, a book came out. The title changed a couple times, but essentially it was called The Titan. And it was about the biggest passenger ship in the world. It has a sister ship, and on its maiden voyage, it was sunk, carrying some of the most influential people in the world. Sound familiar to you?
That sounds like 1912, the Titanic.
Interesting. 1912, the Titanic. And why was that such a significant event? Why is the Titanic always thrown back at us versus, say, the Lusitania, another ship that was sunk under nefarious reasons? In a lot of ways, I'm starting to wonder if it's kind of like a messaging system of keeping the troops in line, because what happened? The Titanic was sunk, and if you believe that ice can cut through steel, and I've worked in steel foundries before, my dad had a steel manufacturing company, and I cannot reproduce ice in any way, shape, or form colliding with or jamming up against steel that is anywhere close to what the Titanic had, where it could actually sever what was claimed to have sunk the Titanic. Well, here, what's the interesting result? The families that were opposing the 1913 adoption of the Federal Reserve Act, including powerful families like the Astors, that
Just happened to be on board.
just happened to be on board. And how
Right.
funny that their removal cleared the way for the Jekyll Island meetings, which led to the December 23rd, everyone's home for the holidays, joke of a vote in 1913 that made the law legal. A law where even Charles Lindbergh's father was screaming on that the night before, saying, the American people don't know it yet, but their day of reckoning is coming, because he understood the Federal Reserve the same way that we talked about it in that example of the little utopia.
Yeah.
That is someday they are going to pull the plug when they're ready, and in are going to come all the guns and tanks, and all the FEMA camps that are built suddenly going to be occupied, and we become Nazi Germany overnight. And it's not a big surprise to have discovered, because again, as a CEO and a businessman, who's the true controllers? It's the money. I actually got fired from one of my companies. I was the founder of it. I owned the biggest piece of it. But the guys that had put in the few $1,000,000 and had the right voting rights actually got me fired out of my own country. That is where the real power is. And you certainly understood my example of how I could get news media to go with what I want, to get an arms industry to go my way. And this is coming. Millions of people see it now, and they're opening their eyes to it. But it is the 11th hour. I mean, it's 11:55. That atomic clock could actually be accurate here.
Yeah.
And
David, I think we're at the point where it's about 11:55 in our show, and I think what you just ended up with talking about is really where we wanted to go with this, is warn people that, hey, time is starting to run out, and we all have to start looking at this and trying to learn what's really happening to us, that this new world order that everybody's been talking about is really a way of taking the power away from we the people in our local communities, and actually even taking the power away from the federal government inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C., and it going to the UN building or The Hague or someplace like that, where we're not going to have a government that's close to home anymore.
We do not want to live under the Constitution that is chartered at the United Nations. I've actually read it, and that is one of the scariest documents I've ever seen. And I mean, they're on record publicly as being Luciferian worshipers. One of their directors was quoted as saying, no one is going to enter the New World Order without making a pledge to Lucifer. So we're talking, I mean, this is scary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? This is the fight America and the rest of the world has on its hands. And if your listeners, the first thing to do, if this is news to any of your listeners, is to get knowledgeable. And if you want to find out, there are many other ways than just the films we're putting out. But if you do want to look further into those, I can give you a website if you want to give it to your to listeners.
Okay, you can go ahead and give us that, and then we'll move on.
Just visit www.agdmovie.com and take it from there. But
agdmovie.com. Anatomy of the Great Deception movie.com. And also what I want to talk about is the fact that you have an Indiegogo, I guess it's called, and you have so much information on there, and you have a DVD on there. It kind of looks something like this, and oh, that says the Anatomy of the Great Deception Part 2. Okay.
That's it.
And
you're up to
so
speed.
what we want is everybody to go to the Indiegogo, because you've got everything in there. I read through it, you know, and it's all there and it explains everything. And then people can go from there and take it from there and decide what they want to do. And hopefully they'll want to support your project, because I want to support your project, and you have my pledge that I will support it. And I hope
Thanks, Bill.
you do too.
Well, I appreciate it very much. We need the help. We've got to come together, and there's not a lot of money, as you could probably attest to, in speaking the truth. I could make a lot more money selling widgets to people that don't need widgets. But once you learn these things, I just don't know how you can go back to living that way. At least I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
This will be my path until the Lord takes me out of here. So that's my story.
Okay, so everybody, thanks for watching us, and David, thanks for being on. I just really enjoyed our conversation, and maybe we can do it again sometime when the movie's about ready to be released, and we can talk more about that. But wow, this has been a great conversation. I just really enjoyed talking with you.
All right, Bill, same here. Keep it up.
Okay, we'll do. We'll just keep searching for the truth.
The 23.
The anatomy of a great deception wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. And 9/11 isn't about the past. It's about the future.
There's no more secrets, just ignorance.
Okay, boys and girls, I think you can see now that we're being deceived by the political establishment, just like we've been talking about for the last few years. And that's part of what my book, 2020, A Clear Vision for America, is all about. And I really want you to support David Hooper's project. And all the information is in the article with the links and everything. And visit his Indiegogo and take a look at that and give him some support, because this really, it's our future that we're talking about. So thanks a lot. Just remember, where there is no vision, the people perish. That's Proverbs 29:18. And remember that we need a small, limited government that's streamlined and close to home, which is best for America. The New World Order is not what's best for America. We need to get the U.S. out of the UN and the UN out of the U.S. And we also need to remember to God bless America. God bless all of us. God bless you for watching us. And God save our America. We need you now more than ever before.